Okay, everyone, so let us now continue. We have been looking at the Ig Noble Search. Now we're going to have a look at the Noble Search. And this is how it is described in this particular sutta. Again, this is it's actually called the Noble Search. That's kind of the name of the sutta. And so this is what it says. Is when someone who is themselves liable to be reborn, understanding the drawbacks in being liable to be reborn, seeks the unborn supreme sanctuary extinguishment. Yeah, so you have understood the danger of being reborn, and then you seek for that which is free of rebirth. So when we talk about seeking the unborn, what it really means is freedom from rebirth, freedom from birth in general. So you kind of go in a completely opposite direction of what you had before. And that's kind of challenging, right? I mean, some of the things we're going to talk about in a second is the freedom from death and freedom from old age and all of these things. And it's kind of hard to see how you can find these things. So it's this is one of the things that is so special about the Buddha to be here, which makes him different from most people, is this audacity to just go forth and decide you're going to find the solution to all the big problems of life. That's kind of extraordinary here. So the first thing here is to understand the drawbacks in being reborn. So without understanding those drawbacks, it's going to be very hard to kind of go for this sort of search, and to fully understand that is actually quite hard. It is difficult precisely because our minds are so used to hiding the truth, not really wanting to see the truth. We want to see the world the way our defilements tell us the world we would like it to be, and not the way the world actually is. And so this is a very challenging thing, to really see the drawbacks fully here. And very often what you need to do is you need to have some depth of meditation. You need to kind of abandon the world a little bit. A large part of abandoning the world happens through meditation practice, where you give up the five senses, you give up the body, at least temporarily. And that through that sort of abandoning, temporary abandoning, you can actually start to see the issues here, because you start to see an alternative reality, an alternative possibility. But in the meantime, you have to reflect on these drawbacks to gain a more balanced view of life, of the world, of whatever you want to call it. And so then you seek that liberation from birth. You see the supreme sanctuary. Anuttarang yoga-ksema is the Pali word here for that. And yoga-ksema can be like freedom or safety. And yoga is not kind of yoga postures. Yoga is really, it means exertion in the Pali language. That's kind of one of the main. It also means a yoke. So you are tying two things together. It's the same word as the English word yoke, really. It comes from the same root, because these are all Indo-European languages. They're all related to each other. But it means exertion, practice. So you gain the liberation from having to exert yourself. And this is one of the things about life in general, is all the exertion that we need to do just to survive, just to live. All this seeking for something, never really finding it. Always having to strain yourself to seek more, and never actually getting anywhere, just roaming around randomly, following kind of the inner impulses and drives in our life, which we want to be happy, we want to find freedom from suffering. But instead of actually finding that, we end up just roaming aimlessly around, not really having any clear sense of direction. Why? Because we don't see things clearly, because of wrong view, because of misunderstanding of the nature of the reality. We don't find that freedom from exertion. Until one day we start practicing this path, we understand what's going on, and then one day you can really relax. I can relax. I've never relaxed before, and suddenly one day, wow, relaxation is possible. There's no more of this seeking here. And this is kind of the goal of this whole thing. This is why the freedom from exertion is considered one of the high points of this path. Supreme sanctuary is a translation here by Bhante Sujato. And then Nibbana, which is here translated as extinguishment. You want to extinguish things. What are you extinguishing? Well, primarily you are extinguishing dukkha, suffering. And that is obviously nice. It's nice to get rid of dukkha. And so that is the main extinguishment here. And also you can say it's an extinguishment of defilements of the mind, an extinguishment of attachments, an extinguishment of the sense of self, which actually is a kind of liberation. It's hard to see maybe, but it's a kind of liberation to get rid of that sense of self. You can know that sometimes in your meditation practice, your sense of self drops away a little bit. You think a little bit less things happening in your mind, and it feels like you are liberated from something when the mind stops thinking so much. And that is part of the idea of being liberated from the sense of self. So all of these things are kind of liberations. And it is very important to translate words like Nibbana. To the ancient Indians, again, it had a meaning. And its meaning is basically extinguishment, like extinguishing a lamp. And when you extinguish a fire or a lamp, then that's kind of what the meaning is here. The fire is like burning. It's pain, it's suffering. It is the defilements. Defilements also burn your mind because they are restless, moving around, driving you forward. Craving says, work harder, you need this, you need that, then you'll be happy. You didn't get happy? Sorry, just work even harder. Then it goes on like that forever, basically, never getting anywhere. So one of the beautiful things about the Buddhist path, this idea of a supreme sanctuary, is like the Buddhist path has an end. There is a goal. It has an end point. One of the epithets of the path of Buddha is sāatang. Sāatang means having a goal. And so there actually is an end. You go towards something and you reach somewhere. And this, I think, is probably from a Buddhist point of view, this is unique to the Buddhist teachings. Because from a Buddhist point of view, you can be reborn in any kind of heavenly realm, which is what other kind of religions may suggest that you should do. But that is not really the end of things from a Buddhist point of view. Yes, maybe you get reborn there, maybe you're going to be happy for a while, but then that happiness comes to an end. You're back to square one again. It's this kind of snakes and ladders. Go to the top, bang, you fall down again. And there's no final goal, no final purpose. And this is what makes the Buddhist path so special in many ways. So this is the noble search, right? And it is a very demanding search. It takes someone pretty special to enter upon this search. And this is kind of what makes the Buddha to be special. This build-up of right view and build-up of good qualities that enables him to do this. Themselves liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupt. Understand the drawbacks in these things, and they seek the freedom from old age, the freedom from sickness, the freedom from death, the freedom from sorrow, the freedom from corruption, the supreme sanctuary extinguishment. So this is what the Buddha to be sets out, finding an end of all of these things, especially old age, illness and death. These are the main three things that he's seeking a solution to. So this is the noble search, and you can kind of feel it is noble, right? It is very different from how most people see the world, and it is... it's not obvious that you're going to find that solution at all. So you have to kind of try, because there are many things that suggest there is no solution. The sense of self, among other things, get in the way. So then you have to try and see what happens. Then what happens next is the following. This is the noble search. Mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening here, I too, being liable to be reborn, sought what is also liable to be reborn. So before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening is this word over here, bodhisatta. bodhisattva, the va on the end is just a second word, which is kind of joined with the first one, but bodhisattva is the word there. So this is like a bodhisattva, so the intent on awakening, I think, is probably the right translation of that. So this, when does this happen? When does the Buddha to be become a bodhisattva? Is it 28 Buddhas ago under the Buddha Dipankara, and he is the ascetic Sumedha who bows down to the Buddha Dipankara and makes a vow that gives rise to the bodhicitta, and from now on I'm going to practice for 4 incalculable eons and become the Buddha. Is that the bodhisattva, or is it bodhisattva someone else? Interesting question, right? And I think what is interesting is that the way that the word bodhisattva is used in the suttas, it seems essentially to mean the Buddha to be after he's going forth from the household life until he reaches awakening. So that short period in between there, maybe a few years while he's seeking the awakening, that's when he is intent on awakening, right? Because he goes forth, and that's when he is seeking for a solution to these problems. So it's only that short period. And that kind of changes the history of Buddhism quite a lot. It makes it a lot shorter, the history of Buddhism. Yeah? If we go from 4 incalculable eons to 6 years. It's a big difference. So, and that I think is more realistic and more natural, and kind of fits with my sentiments of how the world works. So he is intent on awakening, and it says here, I too, being liable to being reborn, sought what is also liable to be reborn. Yeah, this is the Buddha to be. He wasn't really seeking for awakening. If he did this, made this intention under a previous Buddha, I'm going to seek awakening through 4 incalculable eons, he should be seeking Nibbana, he should be seeking Buddhahood. No, he's not seeking that at all. He's seeking what is liable to be reborn. Yeah, he's seeking the wrong thing. It doesn't fit with the kind of bigger story that we normally hear about the Buddha. And this is the kind of thing that you see in many places in the suttas, that this whole story of someone called the Bodhisattva who was practicing for 4 incalculable eons, it doesn't fit with what the Buddha says about himself in the suttas. What he says about himself was that he had wrong view. He was looking for the wrong thing. He was looking for other things that are being reborn, other things that are subject to old age, death, illness, and all of these kind of things. And again, this brings us back to this idea of the Buddha being human, just like us. Wrong kind of ideas. He needs to reflect, he needs to think about these things carefully to understand what is actually going on. Yeah, so that's kind of drives home that point of the Buddha being a human being instead of being some kind of amazing bodhisattva. So this kind of makes sense, yeah, when you see these things more clearly. Yeah. So, and then myself liable to grow old, to fall sick, to die, to sorrow, to become corrupt. I sought what is also liable to these things. Yeah, so again, the bodhisattva or the Buddha to be making the same mistake as we all do, seeking in the wrong place, seeking the wrong thing, and then of course having the same problems potentially as everyone else. But, and this is the difference between the Buddha and everyone else, then it occurred to me, why do I, being liable to be reborn, grow old, fall sick, sorrow, die, and become corrupt, seek things that have the same nature here? Why don't I seek the freedom from birth, the freedom from old age, the freedom from illness, the freedom from dying, the freedom from sorrow, the freedom from corruption, the supreme sanctuary, extinguishment? Sometime later, was still black-haired, blessed with youth, in the prime of life, though my mother and father wished otherwise, weeping with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, dressed in ochre robes, and went forth from the lay life to homelessness. So now the view has been purified to the point where right intention arises. Right intention is then the going forth, becoming a monastic, and then seeking this extraordinary liberation from all of this suffering and all of these problems. While he was still young is one of the things that you always see in the suttas. You don't wait till you are old before you go forth. You do it while you're young. That's when you have the energy. That's when you have the agility of mind to really make the most of this Buddhist path. In India at the time, the usual thing was to go forth when you're old. When you were useless, you couldn't do anything anymore. Okay, I have no energy left. I can't make any money. My relatives are kind of wanting to get rid of me. And so maybe time to go forth. Okay, what else are you going to do with your life? It's not so interesting anymore, so you go forth. And that was kind of the standard procedure in those days, with the 4 stages of life. But really the point, of course, is that this is such an important thing, the idea of finding this liberation. This is what the meaning of life is about, so you should really go forth as soon as possible, as soon as you're able to give rise to that right view. That is when you go forth. And you will notice here the interesting little point that his mother and father wished otherwise. You will notice this is very different from the traditional story that you hear about the Buddha going forth. The usual story of the Buddha going forth is that he leaves in the middle of the night. He gets onto the horse Kantaka. He kind of waves goodbye to his wife and son, and he kind of sets off on the horse Kantaka, rides off and jumps over the city walls and kind of disappears. It's this kind of romantic idea of what it is to be. It's almost like a Hollywood movie here, right? And of course, it turns out to be completely wrong. What happened was that he told his parents, they had a chance to say they wished otherwise, and they were sad because if you have a son like the Buddha to be, probably a pretty impressive son. And so they weren't too happy, right? I mean, people don't want to lose their son or daughter if they can become a doctor or a lawyer, but here's the Buddha to be, he kind of the supreme whatever. And so the reality is that he obviously had some conversation with his family, and he must have made sure that his family was okay. That's kind of implied in this whole thing. And so the real story is actually quite different. So sometimes to know a little bit about the suttas can be helpful, and then you can... But it's kind of nice to know that the Buddha was responsible, right? He wasn't some irresponsible person who just left his family in trouble. Anyway, so there you are. This is the power of these kind of reflections. They're very simple reflections, but also at the same time very, very powerful. And what you can see from this, and I think the most important one of these reflections is obviously the death reflection, because it brings all of these things together. And you can argue that the reflection of death is really what made Buddhism in this world. One person's reflection on death in a profound way, this is what made the Dhamma become available in the world. This is why we have a Buddha. That's how powerful it is. So extraordinarily powerful reflection if you do it fully and take the full consequences of that. So this is what this is really about. So there you are. This is kind of the first aspect of right view that I wanted to touch on. And one of several reasons why the Buddha actually went forth. I'm going to look at a couple of more reasons in much less detail. So let's have a look at the next one. So this is from the what is called the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 85, Middle Length Sayings 85. And this is from a discussion between the Buddha and a Prince Bodhi here. This is not Bhikkhu Bodhi, but Prince Bodhi here. So, and this is kind of a standard thing, and there's usually they offer a meal to the Buddha, and then they have some Dhamma discussion afterwards. A very common thing. The way things were done at that time in India. These days we offer a meal and we do some chanting that nobody understands afterwards. That's the difference. So. In those days, things were more meaningful, right? They were more kind of better. So when the Buddha had eaten and washed his hand and bowl, Prince Bodhi took a low seat, sat to one side, and said to him, "Sir, this is what I think. Pleasure is not gained through pleasure. Pleasure is gained through pain." no pain, no gain. This is really what this is about. And this was a very common view in ancient India. This is what the Jains were all about. This is what many of the other traditions were about. Torturing yourself to the max, and then the idea that somehow, by torturing yourself to the max, somehow you become happy, especially in your next life, maybe, yeah, torture now, and when you die, then you kind of go to heaven afterwards because you torture yourself. And this seems to be a very common kind of human understanding. And even the Buddha to be himself practiced in this way, right? Before his awakening, he did all these torture practices. So it seems to be very common in the world. If you look at the religions of the world, it's a very common idea. You find it in Christianity, you find it in Islam, you find it certainly in Hinduism. It seems to be common. It seems to be baked into our kind of human psychology, the idea that somehow if you experience pain, that must result in happiness down the track. So be careful with that one, because probably each one of us here has a little bit of that in us, because it seems to be what human beings do. But is that what the Buddha thinks? So let's see what the Buddha has to say this before we discuss this in a little bit more detail. Prince, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening. So this is the kind of phrase that we will see all the time, because this is what I have been using as the marker for finding suttas that have to do before the awakening. I too thought pleasure is not gained through pleasure, pleasure is to be gained through pain. The Buddha to be here. Again here, wrong view. This time we talk about wrong view. Misunderstood what things are like. So again, this is what you see again and again in the suttas. The Buddha before his awakening, he misunderstood the nature of reality, just like anyone else. And he thought that pleasure is to be gained through pain. That's why he practiced as a Jain ascetic or something like that for quite a while before his awakening. So same mistake. Seems like everyone almost makes this mistake. It's very, very universal. Sometime later, and then he goes on about ordaining again. This is exactly the same thing as before. And then he goes on and he goes to show the whole gradual training from the very beginning of the path, from going forth and all the way to awakening. And some of the important things that he shows in that process is that actually it is bliss that ultimately leads to awakening here. You have to go through each stage of the path has its own kind of satisfaction and happiness. When you live with kindness, actually that very fact of living with kindness feels good. When you live with a degree of restraint in your life, that too has a positive effect on you. When you get to the deep state of meditation, absolutely, you can feel incredible amounts of bliss. And that bliss actually becomes the cause for liberation itself. So if anything is true of the Buddhist path, is that pleasure leads to pleasure. But you have to define pleasure in the right way here. That is the only critical thing here. This is what this really is about. So it is a completely, again, a change from what life was like before the Buddha, and then a complete different understanding of reality here. Just have to define pleasure in the right way. It leads to more pleasure here. And this is something that everyone should remember when you practice the Buddhist path. You should always look for the pleasure, the joyful aspect of this practice. And there's many reasons for that. First of all, you should do it simply because this is what works according to the suttas. But secondly, because it encourages you. If you enjoy the practice on the Buddhist path, are you more likely to do it, or are you less likely to do it? You're more likely to do it, right? And this is kind of the point. And for too many people, the idea of spiritual practice is like a pain, it's like an endurance, it's like something they have to do. So maybe down the track there will be kind of some results coming from this. But usually the only result is that you stop being a Buddhist. That's a bad result, right? Okay, enough of this Buddhism, too much pain. The only result is that you give up on being a Buddhist and you become some other thing instead, like maybe a free thinker. Anyone here who's a free thinker? No free thinkers? Okay, so it's good, because free thinking is a conceit. There is no such thing as free thinking, right? We're all kind of conditioned into whatever thinking we have, so that's kind of just another problem, really. So So the idea here is to enjoy what we're doing here. And this is very important when it comes to meditation practice. You learn to relax, you learn to make meditation enjoyable, you learn to make being kind enjoyable, you don't force yourself in the wrong way. And as you learn that, you actually start to understand how this path works properly. And then from the very highest happinesses of the path, that's where eventually awakening happens. And awakening, of course, is an even higher happiness again. So when the Buddha is looking for an end to suffering, it may sound boring, just the end of suffering, but actually there is the opposite side of the coin, and that is that this is also the highest happiness, another way. It's easy to misunderstand the whole Buddhist path if we always focus on suffering, when in fact the opposite is also true in all circumstances as well. So that's a brief idea of the Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, which I think is kind of interesting, the wrong view of the Buddha. Now let's go on to the another sutta which I have been looking at quite a lot recently, and I will just very briefly have a look at it again. And this is the Atadanda Sutta. And so this is a different kind of viewpoint of the problem, because so far we have looked at the kind of internal problem, I am subject to these things, but there's also the external world itself, and how we can deal with the external world. Just not our inner problems, but the external world outside, and whether there are any problems in that world. And this is also from the Buddha before his awakening, and this is what he has to say. Perils stem from those who take up arms. Or you can say fear. Bhayang is like fear or perils. Just look at people in conflict. So the idea here is that medaga, the word Pali word there, actually means like conflict or discussion or argument or something like that. So people in conflict, they take up attadanda, take up danda. Danda means like a stick, or punishment, or maybe a weapon, all of those things. So once you are in conflict with someone, you are arguing with them, then you tend to take up, very commonly, people will start punishing each other, at least verbally, but maybe also physically as well, with weapons or whatever have you. Conflict leads to problem. So I shall extol how I came to be stirred with a sense of urgency. So the point here, and let's just look at the next verse before I go into that. I saw this population flounder like a fish in a little puddle. Seeing them fight each other, fear came upon me. So again, we're dealing with the Buddha to be. He becomes stirred with a sense of urgency, and fear came upon the Buddha to be. Again, something we can recognize. It might be when you look at the news on TV and you see things going wrong in the world, maybe you feel a bit of fear. What's happening? What's going to happen next? When is the war coming to Singapore? Hopefully no war in Singapore, but you never know, right? It's hard to kind of be sure about these things, so you just don't know. And so this is kind of the fear, because the uncertainty is so large. We just don't know what's going to happen next. And so the point here is that we are like fish in a puddle. And this is even more true now than it was at the time of the Buddha. A puddle is a small place. In a tiny little puddle, the fish is frightened because there's a small amount of water. The fish is thrashing about, but there's nowhere to go. We're all trapped in this puddle together. We are floundering, a population that is floundering. And this puddle is the world. We cannot escape this world. We can travel to Europe, to Africa, to China, to North America, to South America. You can travel even to Antarctica. I don't know if it's not a good place for Singaporeans. Too cold in Antarctica for Singaporeans. But you can travel to all of these places. And do you get away from this? No, it's just more of the same. It's like a puddle. The world is a small place because it is limited by the same kind of factors. It is limited by the five sense realm. It is limited by the world as we know it. You don't escape the world by travel. The escape from the world happens somewhere else. We live in this small world together. And understanding that world, the nature of that world, again, it helps you move away from that world onto the spiritual path. And so the point here is that looking at people in conflict, looking at how they take up arms based on that, well, this is just another realization of the nature of the world, that the nature of the world is such that it is inherently violent and full of conflict. There is no such thing as a world without conflict. There's no such thing as a world without violence. And the reason is because we are bound by the same external things. We share the external world. And because we share the external world, but we have different ideas about that external world, we perceive it differently, and also we want the same thing through our greed and desires, there's always going to be conflict. There's not a single person on this planet that you're going to agree 100% with, right? We all have different views, different ideas, and this is one of the reasons why we argue with each other, because our perceptions are formed by our background, by our family, by our nationality, by our past lives, by all of these kind of things. And because we all have slightly different backgrounds, our perceptions of reality are going to be different. And everyone thinks they are right. Is anyone here who thinks they're wrong? Yeah, you think you're right. Yeah, if you didn't think you were right about being a Buddhist, you probably wouldn't be here. Yeah, this is why you think it's good to be a Buddhist. And all our views, all our perceptions of the world, we think we are right about that. And because we think we are right and someone else disagrees, then that's why we have arguments with other people. And we get into conflict, and we look at things in different ways, because we see the external world differently. Just as important, maybe more important, is that we are all greedy. We are all full of desires and craving. And the world that we are greedy about is the same world. We're greedy about the same things. We want to have relationships with the same people. We're competing for the same jobs. We're fighting over those things in the world that are scarce. The world economy is scarce. The resources are not endless. And so it is inherent in that world that there is always going to be conflict. This doesn't mean that we can't create better societies. Of course we can. There are some societies that are run better than others. We know that from looking around the world. So we can do better, but there's always going to be a residue of conflict, always a residue of violence in that world. And this is what the Buddha is seeing here. And the moment he sees that, fear comes upon him. He realized the danger of this realm. And then also, not just fear, but also the sense of urgency. I've got to do something about this. Quickly. Now is the time. Right view gives rise to urgency. Not just the idea of doing things differently, but also urgency at the same time. So when you develop the idea of right view, when you strengthen that in you, it's going to give sense to this feeling, okay, I've got to do something now, because now is the only opportunity I have. If I don't do it now, it may never happen at all. So developing right view leads to all of these kind of things. So the world is kind of a problematic place, and it can never be without problems. And this is the external idea of the world. The world around was hollow. There is no essence to the world. There is no core. There's nothing to hold on to. All directions are in turmoil. There's nowhere to stand. As soon as you take your stand, it's going to move. The earth is going to shake. It's going to be pulled out from under your feet. You're going to fall over because there's nothing you can hold on to. Taking a stand somewhere is like holding on to something. It's like relying on something, relying for the ground to be stable, when in fact the ground is not going to be stable there. Wanting a home for myself, I saw nowhere unsettled. In other words, this here means that there is nowhere to rest. This is what really seems to be the meaning here. You want a home. A home is a place where you can lock the door and you can be safe from the world and no longer have a problem from the outside. You can enjoy yourself and cook some meals and have some nice entertainment, enjoy the company of your family. And then you realize even that is unreliable. There is nowhere unsettled. There's nowhere to rest. There's nowhere where you can stop, because that too will be taken from you eventually. And then even when you try to settle down, they continue fighting. Seeing that, I grew uneasy. Then I saw a dart there, so hard to see, stuck in the heart. And that, of course, is the idea of the dart of craving, which is the cause of all of these things. The external world cannot be changed. The external world is the way it's going to be. But at the very least, we can stop desiring all of these things that are inherently problematic. And this is what the Buddha is seeing here. So the Buddha is eyes wide open, seeing what is actually there, not trying to hide, not trying to kind of go, not trying to do things that are impossible to do. And this is what makes the Buddha so exceptional. He goes against the grain of the world, and this is what makes him so remarkable. Most of us, we kind of follow along. Most people in the world, they follow along. We do what everyone else does because that's kind of the easy way. And your parents say, okay, you better get married, you get 1.5 kids, or whatever it is in Singapore, and I'm not sure, 1.4 or whatever it is. And so you do follow along the same route as everyone else. And of course, by following the route of everyone else, you become like everyone else. Do you want to be like everyone else? It's not nice to be like everyone else. If you look at the average people in the world, do they find any real satisfaction or happiness? Not really. Don't be like everyone else. Be special. I always like to say to people, be the black sheep. Yeah, because the white sheep, they all go over the cliff. One sheep leads, everyone else goes over the cliff. The black sheep is the one that turns around. Yeah, it doesn't go over the cliff. I heard recently that there is not a black sheep, but there's a pink sheep, apparently. That's what I heard recently. I don't know if you heard about the pink sheep. The pink sheep, apparently there was an artist in Iceland. Have anyone been to Iceland before? Yes? Wow, okay, been to Iceland. Okay, cool. So did you see the pink sheep in Iceland? Didn't see that. So apparently there was this artist in Iceland, and she would draw all the sheep. Instead of making them white, she made them pink. Because kind of these are the rebellious sheep, right? But for her they were pink rather than black, because black is kind of a bit, a bit sort of on the dark side. So a pink sheep is kind of the latest kind of rebellious sheep. So be a pink sheep. Yeah, be a whatever color you're wearing. What are the colors of the BF? Green. Okay, so be a green sheep. That sounds good. Be a green sheep. Think for yourself. And this is, I think, so important. Yeah, when it comes to all of these things that have to do with the Dhamma, you have to kind of go in a slightly different direction. You have to be a little bit rebellious. If you're not rebellious, you are just going to go head over the same cliff as everyone else. Anyway, I'm not going to spend much more time on this particular sutta, even though it's a very interesting sutta. I have read it so many times recently that I need a break from the sutta. So these are some of the ideas of the Buddha, looking at the world, trying to understand the causes that actually lead to all of this turmoil. The cause here is that everything is hollow, there's nothing substantial, and it's driven by craving. That's the dart there. And because it is driven by craving, driven by defilements, it is always going to have to be like this, because as long as craving is there, the problem will be there. There's some interesting consequences of this. It means that there is no utopia in the world. Human beings, we are masters at kind of looking out for utopias, kind of final solutions, building up a society that kind of is the ultimate society. That's kind of what an utopia is. And once you have made that kind of society, then everything is okay. You can relax. But the problem is that the Buddhist point of view is that the underlying tendencies in the human mind, like the illusion, the delusion, the greed, and the ill will, these things, they always undermine any kind of utopia you try to make, because utopias cannot be imposed on the human mind, because the human mind will use that utopia to its own advantage. You see that in those countries where they have tried to have communist countries, and communist ideas on paper sound really nice, on paper sound really good, but the reality is that it's undermined by the human willingness to use their position in society to their own benefit. That's what greed and delusion does. It uses any kind of society to your benefit. Same thing with capitalism. Same thing with any kind of system you try to make. It's going to be undermined by the human defilements, the human problems. And the human defilement is such that if you allow it full reign, one person will have everything. You will never be satisfied until you have everything. And then when you have everything, you realize that too doesn't satisfy you. Maybe then you kind of go towards something else. I have this theory, the idea of the multiverse. Have you heard about this idea? There's kind of an idea in science that there's not only one universe, there's endless number of universes. And if you go to the Ratapala Sutta, I think you find the answer there to the multiverse. Because according to the Ratapala Sutta, this is the very nice sutta, this young man called Ratapala, he goes forth, becomes a monk, and after becoming a monk, he becomes an arahant, and after becoming an arahant, he comes back to his home village. Does anyone know the Ratapala Sutta? No, don't know? Okay. And so he comes back to his home village, and in that village there is a king, King Kuravya. And King Kuravya goes to Ratapala and bows down, and he says to him, well, you are young, you are young, you are wealthy, you have a good family, you have everything in life. Why on earth did you become a monk? Yeah, what's going on? And it is amazing. How is it possible? And so he says, well, it is when I heard the 4 summaries of the Dhamma that I decided to become a monk. This is what he says. Right? So 4 summaries of the Dhamma, then straight away he became a monk. It's a very, very nice story about how he became a monk and all of that. And one of those stories is that, one of those summaries is that he says to the king, well, the world is insatiate. Yeah, the world is that there is no, the world is a slave to craving. It is insatiate. In other words, there's no satisfaction in the world. We are a slave to craving. Craving drives us on without any kind of limit. And then the king says, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean we're slave to craving? And then he says that, well, imagine, great king, that there was a man coming from the east. And the man coming from the east says, well, in the east there is a big kingdom. In that kingdom there is elephants and horses and gold and bullion and money and lots of land and all kind of things. And your military is stronger than their military, so you can conquer it. What would you do? And the king says, we would conquer it. That's what kings do, right? They conquer things. Okay, that's kind of the nature of kings. They just go and conquer things. So, well, there's another man coming from the north with the same story. What we will conquer that one as well. And one from the south and one from the west, or I can't remember where I started now, but anyway, from one of these, every direction someone is coming, what will you do? I will conquer that one as well. And what if someone came from overseas, really, really far away? There's another, we will conquer that one as well. And then Ratapala said, well, that's what we mean. The world is insatiate. We are the slave to craving. Craving drives this endless kind of conquest. So where is the limit? Well, the limit is, what about when you own the whole earth? Are you going to be happy then? Probably not, right? So the next thing is maybe Mars, maybe? Venus, the solar system. Once you have one solar system, do you think you're going to be happy with one solar system? No way. More solar systems. When you eventually have the whole galaxy, you're going to be happy? More galaxies, right? And so how many galaxies are there in the world? I don't know, hundreds of billions of galaxies. What happens when you have all the galaxies in the world? What are you going to do then? And you're the master of everything. Craving is still not going to be satisfied, guaranteed. We know that because craving is never satisfied. Well, this is where I think the multiverse idea came from. It came from the craving that wasn't satisfied with just having one universe. We wanted more. And so we came up with the idea of multiverses. And so then there is an endless number of multiverses. And the idea is that every moment of existence, one endless number of universes are created every moment of existence almost. It's like so inflationary, it's just ridiculous. And that's kind of where maybe finally we kind of, we didn't know what to make beyond that. So that's kind of, until someone finds that craving wants even more than that. But I think maybe craving is kind of sometimes behind some of these things. I'm exaggerating a bit, of course, but that's kind of the driving force in human beings, never being satisfied with anything. So this is kind of the idea here. Craving always leads to conflict, because craving always wants more, and because there are limited resources, that's impossible. So now you know why Buddhism is sometimes regarded as pessimistic. Because we talk about so many kind of negative things, but remember the point is not really whether it's pessimistic or not. The problem is whether it is realistic, and I think that in all of these things it probably is realistic, and that this is the way to look at it. So now we have looked at a number of the things that made the Buddha go forth. And now I'm going to look at something which is a little bit different. And this is something that is perhaps a little bit more an angle that maybe you haven't seen before. And this is the sutta on the 4 great dreams, the 5 great dreams. You know that sutta? No one knows that sutta? Okay, so that's good. No one knows it, then it's kind of handy. So let's have a look at the 5 great dreams. The great dreams. Okay, before his awakening, 5 great dreams appeared to the realized one, the perfected one, the fully awakened Buddha, when he was still not awake, but intent on awakening. What 5? This great earth was his bed. Himalaya, the king of mountains, was his pillow. His left hand was laid down in the eastern ocean. His right hand was laid down in the western sea. And both his feet were laid down in the southern sea. This was the first dream of the Bodhisattva before the awakening here. So let's go through these things so you can kind of see them as we go along. That's dream number 1, right? It's interesting here. Dream number 2. Next, a kind of grass called the crosser grew up from his navel and stood pressing against the cloudy sky here. This was the second dream that appeared to the realized one here. Next, white caterpillars with black heads crawled up from his feet and covered his knees. What do you think? This was the third great dream, right? Next, 4 birds of different colors came from the 4 quarters. They fell at his feet, turning pure white. The 4th dream, 5th dream. Next, he walked back and forth on top of a huge mountain of filth while remaining unsoiled. This is the 5th great dream that appeared to the realized one before his awakening here. So these are the 5 dreams. Now, what do they mean? And the thing is here that these dreams have meanings, right? This is kind of the whole point of this particular sutta. And obviously, the Buddha, before his awakening, he had an idea that these dreams have meanings. And of course, they are prophetic dreams. Maybe you can kind of guess that already. They're a prophecy about the future. So you have to interpret them in the right way, and you have to regard them as a prophecy at the same time. And one of the interesting things about this is that most today, if you tell someone that you have a dream, most people wouldn't regard it as a prophecy, right? If you dream that you're going to be the king of Singapore, then or the queen of Singapore, people would kind of just probably laugh at you, and you would kind of, you would never dare to tell anyone because it was just too embarrassing. Most of our dreams are really weird. That's kind of what's both the fun and the scary part of dreams, is how weird they can often be. So, but in ancient India, because they had a different view of the world, we saw this thing about rebirth before. This was the view of ancient India. And because they have a different idea of the mind and what the mind is like, it means that they look at these things differently. And a dream can very easily be a prophecy. So for the Buddha, these dreams were obviously part of the motivation that made him become the Buddha, made him go forth, and made him practice. And that can only work in a society where these things are taken seriously. Otherwise, it would just be dismissed, and you wouldn't think about it. And it shows you how important the conditioning is, right? How incredibly important that is for how we act, for how we live, for how we look at the world, and how it actually influences our motivation. It influences you even whether you're going to become the Buddha or not. If he didn't believe in dreams, maybe he wouldn't become the Buddha, because maybe this motivating factor would not have been there. This is one of the many motivating factors that drive the Buddha. It's kind of fascinating how trapped we are in our perceptions and our views, and how they stop us from doing certain things. It's kind of really extraordinary here. And before, I was just talking about the idea of rebirth at the very beginning there, and talking about whether that was a view they had in ancient India or not. And in the present day, you will find many people who believe in rebirth, but you also find many people who don't believe in rebirth. And why do people believe in rebirth? Why don't they believe in rebirth? And usually the reason that they will tell you if you ask them is that, well, I have thought about it, and this is the only logical view. But actually it's nothing to do with logic. Yeah, the reason why we believe most things in this world is not because of logic. It's because of our conditioning. It's because of how we grow up. It's because who we hang out with. It's because of whether we are part of the BF or part of something else. Yeah, that is what makes these views. And I've seen so many cases of people in this world who especially start off with not believing in rebirth. And after a few years, and they say, yeah, rebirth, that's nonsense, we all know that. It's just cultural conditioning. After a few years, they say, yeah, no, rebirth is the only truth. Yeah, no rebirth, that's nonsense. And you can see how people change from one to the other one. And sometimes maybe they even go the other way, believing in rebirth and rejecting rebirth. And you start to realize it's just conditioning here. It's about what you are used to. What you are used to seems real. It seems true. So if you don't believe in rebirth, or you have doubts about it or whatever, it doesn't actually mean as much as you think it means. It doesn't mean that this is the way you're always going to be. It doesn't mean that this is a logical conclusion. It just means that this is your conditioning. That's the way, the reason you are that way. And this is very interesting and has very, very large consequences. It means that, for example, when someone comes into Buddhism and they kind of start out, you don't really have to argue with them all that much about rebirth. You argue a little bit to kind of give them a little bit to chew on. But usually what happens, if you hang around Buddhist people enough, eventually you just believe in rebirth. It's true. That's kind of how it works. And isn't that extraordinary? Or maybe you come to hate your Buddhist friends, yeah? And then you reject rebirth once and forever and never think about rebirth again. So it depends a little bit how things work out. But guaranteed that you're going to be conditioned by the things around you. And so it's all really conditioning. So when I hear people say they don't believe in rebirth, I find it very hard to take it seriously these days. I find, okay, whatever. You're taking your views far too seriously. That's what I want to say to them. But actually, I don't say that because it doesn't work. So. And this is the same thing here, the idea of whether a dream can be a prophecy or not. So many of our things in our life, so many of our views are so hollow, resting on nothing like logic. And that is pure conditioning being somehow driven into us by some kind of whatever, all the things that have conditioned us over lifetimes perhaps. And what, of course, is the real driver of views very often is what feels good to us. If rebirth feels good to you, you will tend to believe in rebirth. If rebirth feels bad to you, you tend not to believe in rebirth. Why would rebirth feel bad to you? Well, if you think that everyone around you are kind of science people and science people don't believe in rebirth, well, then it feels good to you not to believe in rebirth because you are part of that community. But if you've grown up in a Buddhist family and everyone believes in rebirth and you want to be part of that family, it feels good to believe in rebirth because then you can kind of see eye to eye with your friends and your family members. All of these things are what actually make up what we believe in this world. So let's see what these dreams actually mean. Now, as to when, before his awakening, the realized one, the perfected one, the fully awakened Buddha, still not awake but intent on awakening, this earth was his bed. Himalaya, the king of mountains, was his pillow. His left hand lay down in the eastern sea, his right hand lay down in the western sea, and both his feet were laid down in the southern sea. This was fulfilled when the Buddha awakened to the perfect, when the Buddha was awakened, there's a was missing there, to the perfect awakening. When the Buddha awakened to the perfect awakening is actually correct, So this is then a dream that kind of foresaw, it was fulfilled when he became fully awakened. It's a prophecy of the Buddha's awakening here. So why is that? Well, you can imagine the great earth was his bed. You are encompassing the great earth with your body. So kind of the great earth is like you are larger than the great earth. You've gone beyond the great earth. You're more than that. You encompass the great earth with who you are. Himalaya, the king of mountains. The Himalayas, they are sometimes called like often considered like the center of the earth, or sometimes called the axis mundi, which is like the kind of axis, the kind of the core of around which the earth turns, or something like that. And so he has the kind of the center of the earth, the pivotal point of the earth is his pillow. Again, it kind of shows that the Buddha is above everything. He's gone beyond the ordinary things of the world, and he has gone beyond that. His hands are in the Eastern and Western Ocean. Again, it shows that he encompasses the whole continent, and his feet are in the Southern Ocean. So it's this idea that the Buddha is larger than the world, beyond the world in a certain sense. And that is the idea of awakening to the world. This was the first dream, as to when a kind of grass called the crosser grew up from his navel and stood pressing against the sky. This was fulfilled after the Buddha had awakened to the Noble Eightfold Path. It was well proclaimed wherever there are gods and humans. So this idea of the grass growing from the navel to the sky, and this is the idea, apparently, is this quite a common, apparently, picture drawn in various kind of mythologies and legends around the world. But it's this idea of connecting our present human condition to something higher. For most of humanity, the sky is kind of the limit. The sky is where you enter the Devaloka, you enter the realms of the gods or whatever. So this is kind of creates that crossover, cross from the human realm to a higher realm. That's why it's called the crosser. This is the name of the grass. Tirya is the name of that grass, and Tirya means a cross, quite literally, and that's why it translates as the crosser. And of course, in Buddhism, you take that one step further, because crossing over from the human realm to the other side is not just going to the sky or to heaven, it's actually going all the way to Nibbana, of course. But this is to symbolize that path that takes you all the way up. The Eightfold Path proclaimed to gods and humans. So the awakening of the Buddha, and then you have the Dhamma, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, one thing after the other here, arising. And the white caterpillars with black heads crawled up from his feet and covered his knees. This was fulfilled when many white-clothed lay people went for refuge to him for life. So you can imagine the Indians having a fairly dark skin color. So you have the head, which is kind of fairly dark, and then you have the white clothes, right? And that is kind of the lay community in India at that time. So these are the caterpillars with white heads black heads and white body. And apparently there are such caterpillars. Have you seen those caterpillars? There was someone who did a bit of research on this, and you can find that on the internet. And there's very cute caterpillars, really cute, with black heads and white body here. A big black head and a kind of white body coming afterwards. And these cute little caterpillars, they are the cute lay people, coming. So they are like all of you, the cute lay people practicing in the right way. So you go for refuge for that. And one of the nice ideas of the caterpillars, and this was a point that was made by another monk, is that a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, right? And so you are maybe a cute caterpillar, you become even more cute when you become a butterfly here. And of course, the idea of butterfly, that's the kind of you transform, you transform from an ordinary person and you become an Arya, a noble one. That's when you become a butterfly here. So it has a kind of beautiful, there's a nice, very nice kind of overall idea here, what's going on. And then you have this idea of crawling from the feet to the knees. And of course, the feet, they are the lowest part of the body, right? They're the dirty part of the body. Walking around, and especially in India, the feet are the lowest of the low. It's interesting, they have this idea of how different people are born. So Brahma, which is the supreme god of the Brahmins, is you talk about Brahma is depicted as a human being. And so the different castes in India, they're born from different parts of the human being, of Brahma. So the Brahmins are born from the Brahma's mouth, and probably very sweet, probably a good breath Brahma, not a bad breath Brahma, good breath Brahma, the Brahmins come out getting born from Brahma's mouth. And the Kshatriyas, the warrior caste, and the administrators and the aristocrats of ancient India, they are born from Brahma's chest, the strong chest, the muscular part of Brahma. And then you have the the merchants, they are born from his thighs. Yeah, they're kind of hard-working merchants born from the thighs. And then you have the kind of the lowest of the low. Yeah, and that includes the ascetics. Includes the ascetics, right? Also the sudras, the worker, but also the ascetics. They are born from Brahma's feet. They are the swarthy offspring of the Brahmas, of the kinsmen. Swarthy means black, yeah? Swarthy, black offspring of the Brahma's feet. And that is kind of the people like me, like the ascetics, yeah? So we are really dodgy according to this Brahmin etymology. So what you have here, and you have these people starting on the lowest part of the body, crawling up to the knees, yeah, as they kind of gain a higher status, and maybe when they get to the knees, that's where they become butterflies, maybe, I don't know, and then they are really happening after that. So here you can see it's almost like the Sangha is starting to take shape. Yeah, you have first of all the Buddha coming to the awakening, you have the Dhamma being proclaimed in the world in the Noble Eightfold Path. Now you have the lay people first of all, which is not quite the Sangha, but kind of moving in that direction. In fact, the next one is the Sangha. The 4 kinds of birds of different colors come from the 4 quarters. They fell at his feet, turning white. And this is the 4 castes, the aristocrats, the Brahmins, the merchants, and the workers. They went forward from lay life to homelessness in this teaching and training proclaimed by the realized one and realized supreme freedom. So these are the 4 birds. The Sangha comes into existence, and they all become white when they come into contact with Buddhism, and that probably means they become noble ones, or arahants maybe even. It can also mean that instead of having different colors when they get in, they lose their individual colors and they become like one in the Sangha. In the Sangha, there's not supposed to be any castes, right? It's not like I am better than you. In Sangha, kind of everyone is pretty equal. Well, there is a bit of seniority, but you don't have this caste ideas. You don't have social status in the Sangha as you had before. That's one of those nice and important ideas in Buddhism. No castes, yeah? And you are judged more by your conduct, by who you are. If you have a good heart, if you're a good person, that is good. And if you are a noble one, if you talk about superior people in Buddhism, they are the noble ones, or the superior people. And the weird thing is that if you become a superior person, you lose your sense of being superior. So only when you lose your sense of being superior or inferior or equal, only then do you actually become superior. It's kind of weird, isn't it? It's kind of hard to get your head around that one. But that's kind of the idea. It's precisely the fact that you don't measure yourself against others that makes you a superior person. As to when he walked back and forth on top of a huge mountain of filth while remaining unsoiled, this was fulfilled when the realized one received robes, alms food, lodgings and medicines and supplies for the sick. And he used them untied, uninfatuated, unattached, seeing the drawbacks and understanding the escape. So this is the idea that as a monastic, you use the requisites in the world without being seeking after them, without getting into the idea of getting into requisites. Sometimes people get into requisites as being something like a status symbol. Even you have to have this kind of robe and this kind of bowl and this kind of coffee. No, that's only me. I'm the only one who thinks of things like that. So that's kind of my defilement. But I should start thinking like that. And that's when you have a problem. Yeah. So you'd use these things knowing that they are problematic. It's kind of interesting that this is considered a huge mountain of filth, right? I always think about kind of the beautiful lunch I was getting today. This enormous lunch. I was one tiny little. I'm not that tiny, but I'm fairly small in the amount of food that was offered. It was just magnificent, beautiful food. And then the Buddha says it's all filth. Right? Isn't that kind of fascinating? It shows you can see things from all kinds of different angles. On the one hand, it's beautiful, it's wonderful when people make this kind of offerings, and it's really it really touches your heart in a deep way, both the people who offer and the people who receive, and it's beautiful all around. But looked at from another angle, we are actually striving, we're using that food to strive for something higher. So from another angle, it is not that interesting. And so really, the most beautiful thing about doing an offering is actually the quality of the heart that goes into it. And the best thing about receiving an offering is also the quality of the heart that goes into it. So it's kind of looking at these things in the right way here. So this is the Buddha being above it all. So these are the Buddha's 5 dreams. And I thought I would just show that to you, just to do something slightly different, because I don't think I've taught these 5 dreams here before, so I thought this was the time has come, time has arrived to talk about the 5 dreams. And it shows you that the world sometimes is a more interesting place than maybe we give it credit for here. Anyway, I have gone way over time already. I think I was supposed to stop at 3 o'clock, but I have gone beyond that, so let's have a break, maybe 10-15 minutes. How long should we have a break for? 10 minutes. Okay, so see you back again at 3:20. Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll just take this one out.